Perfect.
Fantastic. Jennifer.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer. I'm here with Evidation Health. I'll kind of set the stage a little bit for who we are, what we do, and then kind of the lens that we are collecting patient input from, and then I'll walk through a more specific case study. A lot of the work that we do is very new, so it's in flight, so I'll kind of focus more on how we're doing this. So just to start off with, for Evidation, we collect a lot of novel data, and then what we do with this is we look at everyday behavior and how this influences healthcare outcomes. So we focus a lot on the passive data collection and behavioral data and contextual data, and wrapping this around more of the PROs or validated instruments that are out there, and a lot of the medical data that is out there. So here's kind of an example of the types of data that we collect, so speech and voice, sleep, diet, etc. And contextual we really see as generated outside of the individual. Behavioral is generated native to the individual. And then, of course, you guys are more familiar with the PROs, questionnaires, and medical data that we are typically collecting. So all of this is really to get a better sense of where the patient is in their journey and then reach them in their environment. So for us, what we're really doing, I'll kind of dive into one of the studies that we're working on, and this is in the cognitive decline space. And the reason why we're doing this is because what's out there right now in terms of the PROs, validated instruments, or imaging, all of that is very reliable and it's validated, but are there better ways to kind of bring in that patient data and patient input and be able to see things that we couldn't see before? So for imaging, it's expensive, it's burdensome. For the PROs and the questionnaires, cognitive decline happens over a very long period of time. And so this is, you have to collect data for a very long period of time. And if we are collecting more of the passive data, is there a way to see more of the subtle changes? Can we see some of the things that we didn't know we could see before? And so that's kind of the reason why we started collecting a lot of this data. So the main question is, what if a patient could just tell us if they're going through cognitive decline right now? And we found that we actually can do this. And one of our initial studies we did was actually with DARPA, and we focused on a voice digital biomarker. So we took data from a Framingham cohort, and then we looked at the voice data here. And then we found that through this exercise, the voice data is very messy. Diarization is very difficult. So this is kind of a combination of doing manual and technical work in order to separate who's speaking, for example, and then what is the actual voice data that you're collecting, what kind of questions are you asking, what are you asking them to do. And so we incorporated a lot of the learnings from this into our study here. So kind of how we set this up is we are going through a few different stages so that we can have rigorous outputs from this. So we start with a feasibility first to make sure that the patient can give us the data, is the right data that we're collecting, we can see signal in this, and then exactly how we want to be collecting this. So for example, for the voice one, knowing that there's the diarization piece or having good voice quality, exactly how we're collecting that through an app and making sure that it's the right frequency, and then it's only recording the person when they're speaking and not the other people in the room, for example. All of these pieces go into how we collect the patient input. So here is kind of how we are looking at the different steps of running this study. And so for the first piece of digital protocol design, this has actually a lot of patient input into what they prefer. So I know there's a lot of focus right now on high quality data and making sure that it's the right data, but a lot of times it's actually that you just need the patient to be participating. And our biggest lesson was that you need patient input to collect patient input. So you want to lower the burden, you want to make it easier for them to participate in a study. And so in this particular one, we actually have 5 sensor devices. We have 2 batteries of cognitive assessments. We have a proctored video test. We collect video and audio data as well. So it is actually pretty complex. And a lot of the people are giving us all the data that we are asking for. And it's because we went through this process of making sure that it's very, very easy for them. So when we go through device selection, it's making sure that it's something that's easy for the consumer. Obviously, in a lot of trials and studies, you can't do this because it does have to be a medical grade research wearable, and we have the luxury right now in the feasibility portion to be a bit more exploratory and open up to consumer devices. So we've worked with pretty much every single device in the space and looked at, okay, what's the patient drop off? How often are they using it? What's the charging like? What's the Wi-Fi or Bluetooth or 3G capabilities? And these things are very granular, but they ultimately dictate the success of gathering that data and having enough data to detect signal. So that's kind of in the device selection piece. And then for the execution, when we do the participant onboarding, what is the method that people like to be onboarded? We've tried different models. So for example, having a virtual model where we just send it into their home, and then we have a video call to help them set up and have technical support that way. Or do we have a more physical location where they go in, they get device, they get set up there? And especially for the more complex ones, in this case, for example, we're giving them a new phone, new hardware, and making sure that everything's ported over and they're using that in their daily lives. Then it's very important to make sure that they're onboarded the right way and you're reaching the patient, in the way that they want to be reached. And this could be even like text versus email versus push notifications. Different cohorts and age groups respond very differently. So we just keep track of every single troubleshooting issue, every single response, and essentially iterate on this so that we can apply this into future studies. So for us, we've also seen that, once you collect the data, there's still a lot of work to be done afterwards. So how do you analyze the data in the appropriate way so that you get something meaningful from all of the patient input so that you can create a tool or a new instrument to apply into a future study? So we've kind of broken this into 3 categories that we really focus on, which is looking at invisible into visible data. So this is kind of what I was saying earlier about subtle changes. So there are changes in mobility or speech, and then when you're collecting data over a period of time and you have high frequency of that data and it's high fidelity, then maybe you can start to detect changes earlier on or detect changes in smaller sample sizes, for example. And then when you see subjective tied with the objective, then you also start to see, okay, we see how the patient perceives that they are experiencing this disease, but objectively, can you also start to quantify how many events are there, how severe is this, what is their progression? And so we've really built the tools in order to look at the analysis and be able to have something meaningful from the patient input. Yeah, out of time.
Question here.
Thank you very much. There we go. Okay. Barbara Coons with DIA. I'm curious about how you're separating out the impact of the use of, say, therapeutic agents or perhaps environmental stimuli in the voice analysis that you're doing, so sleep, diet, etc.
Yeah, so I would say, so therapeutic and contextual. For the contextual piece, what we do is actually we collect this on a daily basis. So we have APIs for weather, for example, or pollen counts or whatever is really relevant to the disease, so we can kind of track this in different zip codes of where the patient is and start to see how that might affect the data. And then for the therapeutic agents, this could be, for example, you have an intervention versus an actual control group so that you can see the difference between that.
Second question?
Okay, this one counts. Thanks very much. Matthias Meal is doing a lot of work with the ear right now, which is very much related to what you're doing. How are you handling the confidentiality issues that crop up in this research, which vary by state to state, I gather?
Yeah, so they do. We actually are very, very careful about confidentiality, all the privacy security pieces. So I'll kind of take voice as an example. So if it is voice that is collected and then you have the raw data of the voice recordings, then there are third parties that can scrub it of, identifying information. Sometimes, because there is this complexity, then maybe you're collecting other voice data where they're not identifying themselves. So they're saying, like they're coughing or they're saying a vowel and they're not exactly saying their name. There are also devices out there now where you can actually have the computed audio feature done automatically on the device, and then you just get the computed audio feature and never the actual raw data with the identifying information. So I think there's a lot of there is a lot of sensitivity around it, but there's a lot of tools out there in order to be able to receive de-identified information.
Excellent. Question here?
Hi, Anthony Yanni from Santa Fe. A quick question. Are you planning on collecting any information from primary caregivers, perhaps, to see, as you're picking up information, the sensitivity of what they're observing as well?
Yes. So right now it's in that feasibility portion that I spoke to. So this is really just to make sure that we can collect the data and we're collecting it in the right way. So the second portion where we start to validate the model, it would actually have a lot of input from the primary caregivers. And this was actually a huge consideration, was that a lot of the patients, especially if they're a little bit more severe, they can't give the inputs that you need.